That's how we own it.
What's up, family? It's your girl, Tamika D, Mallory.
And it's your boy, Mysonne, the general.
And we are your hosts of Street Politicians, the place where the streets and politics meet. What's going on, Mysonne Lennon?
You know me, I am blessed and highly favored, doing God's work.
Sure are. I saw you just a couple of days ago out with the kids in the school, greeting them. Were you guys greeting them when they went in or out? In.
We were greeting them going in.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's cool.
Amazing day. Shout out to PS 197 in Harlem. Shout out to Principal Span who invited me. It was such a dope event, right? And I think it's, like I said, I think it should be something that's implemented all around the city. Like, you know, I think just seeing that presence of men in the school, greeting, you know, just showing that their presence, like, it's because it's so absent. It's not something that's normal, but it should be normal, right? Like, I felt good watching these kids. They seen us. They had music playing. We hugged some of them. We gave them high fives. It was just an energy, you know, and doing that like once a month.
Yeah, you giving them a vibe. It's like a vibe.
And then the school feels protected, right? You feel connected to the school, the community, the brothers coming out of the community, start paying attention. You know, it makes people who would seek to do anything negative around that look somewhere else to go because they realize there's a presence around there that's not going to, you know, tolerate it. So I think it's something that, you know, we should look for, you know, to get done in schools all around the city.
Well, I think two things. One, that's what I was talking about, you know, in reference to the interview, the conversation we had last week on the white man fighting the kid, or, you know, him not fighting the kid, beating up a child because he brought his kid to fight another child, a white kid against a black child. And then, of course, when the black kid got the best of his child, he got frustrated, jumped in and put his hands on the kid, which he shouldn't have. And that was my whole point about fathers, you know, being present. I think it will really, really help us. And you don't have to be someone's biological parent to show up and present the fatherhood that we need in communities. So I think that's great. And I think the second point is that the culture is not going to just change on its own. We literally have to force a shift by actively doing things, whether it's in music, art, entertainment, you know, just everyday life, everything we do in education, everywhere we go and everything we do, even what we eat, what we're feeding ourselves, what we're saying on social media, how we're presenting in every space. We have to be intentional about shifting this culture because people have gotten really comfortable for the last 2 years, 3 years with stupid shit. I keep saying stupid shit is my type. That's my what do you call it, term that I'm using for so many things that's going on right now. And I don't think it's going to just change. We've got to make it change.
Yeah, we got to be intentional. You know, I coined the frame. I've coined the phrase coward culture.
Coward culture and stupid shit. Excuse me. Street Politicians has two phrases that you can depend on us to say. Coward culture by Mysonne Lennon and stupid shit by Tamika Mallory.
Yeah, and that's what it is, man. So shout out to the brothers, shout out to Derek, shout out to Billy, all the other brothers who came out, you know, and represented, man. It was a dope event.
Cool. Oh, I love it. I love it. So while you all were out there at the school with the young people, the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James.
Our sister, Letitia.
As we call her. She did a thing, which was to bring charges against, Donald Trump, and not just him, his kids.
Ooh,
all three of his children
Letitia.
Are in the charges. They are all a part of the case. And, you know, I listened to the press conference, which is not something that I would generally do because I'm so over Trump, because I don't really think that it will result in anything seriously happening to him. But, you know, maybe a Black woman will get it done. But, you know, as I was listening to what he did in terms of inflating his income claiming to have more money and for his properties to be evaluated at higher prices. So no matter what, if the auditors and the appraisers said $200 million when the paperwork was filed or when they applied for loans, it was at 500, 550. I'm talking about not like $20, $30, even 100 million. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that he was inflating his numbers per the charges and that she's put forward. And of course, his children running the companies, in order for him to be able to do that, they would have to be a part of it. Running the companies, the buildings, all the things. And even the size of his apartment at Trump Towers was like, say, 11,000 square feet, or no, 1,100 square feet or something, some number like that. And instead, I think they may have submitted paperwork that said it was like 50 or some crazy numbers. Don't quote me on the numbers. Make sure you read the article. But the point is that what they were doing was just so blatant, right? And at one point I was listening, I'm like, damn, like this is really crazy. Like somebody needs to go to jail. And then I realized the brother learned this stuff from his daddy.
This is what I'm trying to say. This is
like how we need to, it's some other people that need to go down because they've been doing this.
This is a strat. They've been doing this. Black man ain't gonna black man gonna say, I'm gonna put about an extra 10 feet on something, 20 feet, right? I'm gonna put about an extra couple dollars on it. These niggas is look, this is what I'm saying. We doing it wrong, man.
No, we not.
We ain't even stealing right. No, listen what I'm trying to tell you, man. We ain't even stealing right. The crime that we do don't even make sense. These niggas just figure out how to make 200 million and we steal a couple of thousand, 2,000, maybe 50, 60. These niggas hundreds of millions.
And the benefit that they received is that if they inflate the numbers, it puts them in a different tax bracket and therefore they get all of these allotments and tax breaks and they get all of these benefits of having more, because that's how capitalism works. The more you have, the less you have to pay in taxes and the more benefits and perks you get from the system. So it's crazy. We'll see what happens. All I know is I pray for the AG's life. And I hope that she is well protected. And there have been times, and there's there's certainly no secret about it, but there have been times when I've been saying, Tish, I don't like what you're doing, and we've challenged her on many issues. And so it's not so much that I think that she, well, let's put it this way. This political space is very, very complicated. It's so many different complications. And speaking of that goes to our next subject, but it's very complicated. But I also understand that certain things that you have to do or that you choose to do as an elected official, and particularly a Black elected official, it takes courage, because you literally get yourself killed. Anything you have going on, if Pookie and your family got some stuff going on, it's going to become your problem. You can really be damaged in a lot of ways for trying to stand up against the system. So, I shout out to her for that. And hopefully something comes out of it, because Trump is just running wild and no one is doing anything about it. But then I hope after she finishes with Trump that she moves on to some other landlords in New York who are doing just the same, and some other millionaires. So speaking of politics, Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico is like crazy, right?
Amen.
God bless the people. Puerto Rico, very similar to Haiti. It's just like it doesn't stop.
One after another.
It doesn't stop. It just keeps coming. And then you have simultaneously the water crisis in Jackson, which Jackson is not alone. Even in Newark, New Jersey, there have been reports of water issues, and there are other states and cities across the country that have issues with water. But Jackson is in the center of attention right now. we shipped $5,000 worth of water to Jackson State University. We are involved in some events, just actually attended an event to support the people of Jackson. And the thing what comes to my mind is how much we, as all kinds of people, not just Black people, but a lot of different people who don't pay attention to the news and this and that, or people who feel like politics is too much, we really don't understand, as we've talked about on the show many times, and we had a show where we talked about it with Teslin Figaro of Straight Shot No Chaser. Everything is political. Water is political. How you get hurricanes and how they hit and what type of damage happens, and then what they do immediately afterwards to try to preserve lives, that's political. And where you are located in the country, where you are prioritized on the list of the political political priorities, basically, right? Which means you got money or you've got something that benefits the politicians, not just they're going to take care of your community because they should. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. There's got to be something. Either you're voting, you're investing by giving donations. There's got to be something. You making noise, you protesting. You've got to be leaned in order to get the services that you need from this political system. So to sit outside of it and a hurricane hits and you want to make sure that your community is protected, you better be on the ground busting ass, telling them that you want the resources necessary, because when there's certain things that need to be done to protect your community so that when a hurricane hits, it doesn't damage as much as, you know, from an infrastructure perspective, as much as it could. And then of course, things like water, making sure you have clean water, clean pipes like Flint, Michigan, all of that is political because people are making decisions about it.
I have to, you know, and that's what I'm saying. People that trying to circumvent or act like the process, they don't want to be involved in, like, if you ain't at the table, you're on the menu, man, you know? So when we look at these situations and we constantly see the same areas, you know, I know it's geographical,
right? You can't stop that.
You know, right. You can't really stop that, but there has to be something that we can do from a governmental perspective that makes it okay. Since we already know the geographical, you know, situation that they're dealing with, and knowing that they're highly likely to deal with these hurricanes and these tropical storms, what systems are we going to set in place to be able to help them, to prevent, to do things that, you know, that we ain't behind the 8 ball and people are losing their lives and losing their homes and losing their property so rapidly, and we don't have anything set up. So I think we got to look into that. I think people have to be very intentional. I think all of those cities and states and countries who live in those areas that are prone to deal with those mass destructions from hurricanes and tropical storms should have things in place. And I always say that, I'm like, why the same places keep getting hit and having the same, you know,
same devastating impact.
Yeah,
it's like Haiti. Like how can we already know that Haiti has the earthquakes and stuff happen there, right? We know that. We know that there's many environmental challenges.
And we know that Haiti is being punished. So there's
we know that. I mean, that's a whole other thing. But I'm just saying, again, it's political. It's who you have in office. It's your relationship to America, unfortunately, and other very powerful nations around the world. It's so much that's involved with it. And you definitely have to understand the politics of how, even in New Orleans, if you notice, Black people live in lower, what do they call it something? I have to make sure that we talk about this again. People who have more resources, they live higher up. So when the storms come, it impacts the people living in the lower belly of of Louisiana and of New Orleans. So this is it's geographical, but it's also designed by I guess we just have to say racism, because racism is what puts us in certain communities and sort of keeps us in poverty and in areas that we can't necessarily get out of. And they haven't done anything in terms of making sure, well, I mean, there's been some infrastructure stuff done with the levees, but it clearly hasn't been enough. So anyway, it's all political.
All political.
Yeah.
You do politics, or politics will do you.
That's right. You saw The Woman King, and I was all in an uproar about people online suggesting it be boycotted. And so we've been trying to figure out, first of all, what are they talking? Because I don't, I'm not gonna sit here and say everybody that's talking is wrong, because sometimes you can get different perspectives. But we did our little bit of research, we discussed it. They said, one, too many feminine men, that the male characters were feminized. Did you see that?
I seen one guy.
You saw one man, right? But did you see, but the question I asked was, it said, the male characters with an S were feminized. Did you feel that there was a lot?
I didn't agree with that.
Okay. I felt like they were just men and women. That's me. But whatever. Thought they were masculine women. How about that? Nothing. Anyway. Next thing was women and men were pitted against one another.
I never saw that.
And then they talked about the history. So the history component is important, right? Because there are some people who, just because it's coming out of Hollywood, they don't want to have anything to do with it because they don't trust the narratives about, stories about our people. But there are different debates on the history, and we're going to talk about the specifics of it during the interview that we're doing with our guests. But I want to know, because I thought maybe I was tripping. And the question that I'm asking, are we sabotaging? Because it was another movie. What was the name of the other movie that they were talking about? Boycott. What was the name of it? Harriet. Dark-skinned characters, dark-skinned Black women characters. And Viola Davis has been talking about that. So they were saying it then. I figured, am I crazy? But I wanted you and everybody else on our team to see it and give your feedback. And no one said this film should be boycotted.
No, I don't see any reason. I didn't see a reason for Harriet to be boycotted. I think people are so gun-ho on trying to tear things down. Like, that's what it is for me. Like, there are different historical facts there, but when we have movies, there's a level of entertainment that you add. There are levels of things. There will be historical facts. It's based on history, and there'll be some things that don't completely agree with the historical facts that we know, and we understand that. So you should be able to take the history, and you mix it with the entertainment to come up with a movie. And I think people looking for a movie to be to the T historically correct is just stupid, right? So what we want to do, we want to ask the question, do we think it's sabotage, or do we think it is reasonable critique? We want you to comment in the section. Let us know, what do you think? Did you see the movie? Did you see Harriet? Are you listening and paying attention? Because it seems only, like she said, a lot of the movies with dark-skinned women are heroes and being amplified. It seems to have the same level of critique. So are we too critical? Are we overly critical? Are we looking to just sabotage everything that happens that glorifies and amplifies the Black women in America and in our entertainment and our historical context when they meet? Or are we doing it too much? Or is it reasonable? Give us your thoughts on it.
Well, I'm sure our guest today has something to say about it, so we'll ask him. It's like, take me back to Ghana. Oh my Lord, the experience of what we saw and what we did while we were there in Ghana. Wow, wow, wow. And and Mysonne, we have talked so much about how one of the most impactful moments was having an opportunity to meet our guest that is joining us today. And that is Rabbi Kohain Halevi. Oh my, Thank you so much for joining Street Politicians today.
Thank you, man.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to our discussion and exchange today.
Yes. Now you are a rabbi and a priest. You
Yes.
are a visual artist. You're an art teacher. You're a community leader. You have a master's in theology and arts education. You got certificates, so many I can't even name. A public speaker, a historian. I think you are you an anthropologist as well?
Yes, I have, I'm into anthropology, received my certificate in that, been doing that for many years. Well, I've been in this struggle since, this year's 49 years, I can say.
Wow.
From being at Savannah State College. So that's where all of those lineup of certificates and experience and all that comes from.
Wow. And again, just an overall historian and educator. And you, when we visited with you and we had our tour of the slave dungeons, I heard something in your voice, and it made me say, where are you from? Because I could tell it wasn't necessarily there. It was something that was real familiar to me. And being someone who lives, sort of like the North Bronx, and I'm from Harlem, but I've been in the North Bronx for a long time. I knew that sound, and you said Mount Vernon, and I'm like, oh my God, you must know my pastor, Dr. W. Franklin Richardson, who I eventually talked to about you, and he's like, that's my brother. And, that made it even closer to home for us to find out that you are actually from New York, but living in Ghana. And I guess the first question that my son and I discussed that we wanted to ask you is, how does a man find himself first in Mount Vernon and then living in Ghana and educating people there?
Well, yeah, that's a big question. Let me announce that right now we have a group of 350 African-American educators in Ghana right now in Cape Coast. And these are all university and college presidents, and they're here to study how they can introduce African-centered education into the curriculums of our Black school system in America. And so the phenomena of our people reconnecting with Mother Africa is great. And when I was in a symposium with them 2 days ago, they asked me that same question. And they also asked me, how did I, take up this way of life? And how did I become a Pan-Africanist and get involved in all the things I've been involved with? And I took it back to my root. I told them I was born in Mount Vernon, New York. And I was writing a chapter on some of, the early parts of my life. And I named that chapter, when I was young, my mother took me to church and my father took me to Harlem. So that's the name of the chapter. So I got both those spans. My mother was very deep and spiritual into the church. My father was deep in terms of the Harlemites, the Harlem socialite and all of that. And I was on those street corners in Harlem every weekend, listening to the street corner nationalists and preachers talking about African history and African people, where you couldn't get that kind of knowledge anywhere. And of course, for me, it wasn't only knowledge, it was inspiration. So that inspiration came, and I got committed when I was at Savannah State College in Savannah, Georgia, when I left Mount Vernon High School and went to Savannah State to study art education. And then I say I got my calling then. I wanted to be a part of the Black movement. I wanted to be a part of those who made a difference in our people's lives and the conditions that we were living in, the better condition of people of African descent. So I brought that back up to Mount Vernon from Georgia and started the Bereshit Cultural Institute. And we started that institute to educate young Black children in the history of who they were as Black people. I was really upset when I went to school and realized I spent all that time in high school, elementary school, and no significant knowledge about African people was transmitted to us through those curriculums. And I wanted to make sure that that happened to our children at a young age and at their foundation level, that we would put into them who it is that they are as a people. And so that inspiration spurred another inspiration. And that was, I actually got tired of just reading about Africa through textbooks and displaying my Africanness through cliches and posters and making sure I had the latest edition of the latest book on my bookshelf to show that I had read it. But I wanted a real experience with Africa. And so I made my first trip in 1987 And when I made that trip, it was like a spiritual revelation that I had to do this. This was home. It took me 7 years and 13 trips before I finally migrated here in 1994. And so in 1994, I had been part of all the marches that we participated in after the murder of Eleanor Bumpurs, a 78-year-old grandmother in her home in New York City, after the murder of Michael Stewart for painting graffiti in the subways. As you read, I'm a community activist. We led protests in Westchester, protests and Brooklyn, protests in Manhattan, and I got tired of the redundancy, and I said there has to be an alternative. So I decided I wanted to move to Africa to try to carve out some alternative options that we would have, so it wouldn't be like we're animals trapped on a street corner, or trapped in a ghetto, or trapped in a circumstance where we didn't have options. So I decided to move to Africa and bring my activism here, since I realized that we had so many strong activists in the United States of America and elsewhere, but we needed to build bridges. And I was in that position, had made contacts, built networks where I can come to Mother Africa and try to use my experience in America in the movement to bring it to Africa, so we can build bridges and make this one struggle for African people, whether we're in Africa, whether we're in the Americas, or whether it is that we are in this world where we're suffering. We have to join our struggle together so that we can come up with remedies, how we can stop the suffering, stop the dissension, and start with the ascension of African people returning to their proper place, in this globe of being respected and our dignity restored by ourselves.
Amen. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Meeting you was life-changing. That the tour that you gave us, I couldn't hold back tears as you described went down in those dungeons, which they call castles, and you made us refer to them as dungeons, and put it in the real perspective of what happened, and it was a life-changing experience. And I remember first seeing you online, with a lot of our colleagues, and during the year of return, and hearing your voice and everybody came and said, you have to go on this tour with this man. I just want to say thank you, because it's opened my eyes. It's given me a different level of purpose in which the way that I show up and the way that I move, understanding what our people went through just for me to just still be alive, so I just want to thank you for that.
Well, you're quite welcome, my brother. It was my pleasure. And that's part of what I'm here for, to help build that bridge and make that experience real when we experience it.
Yes, sir. And I met, being in Mount Vernon, they had a mini concert day a few weeks ago, in which I met your son and your daughter and took a picture with them. So,
all right.
Yeah, they were really cool. They was like, oh, you with our father in Africa. So I just wanted to say that. But, the work that you do is not something that's known, right? The way that you're so invested in our history, in what it is that we come from, in educating, where did that thirst come from? How did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
Well, I take it nothing less than a very spiritual commitment that I have and that I serve religiously. It's not a religion, but it's something I do religiously. In terms, it's an internal commitment. I feel it's a calling. I come out of the era when I saw, and heard Medgar Evers assassinated in my era. Malcolm X assassinated in my era. The family of Malcolm X, ultimately ended up living in Mount Vernon. Martin Luther King murdered. I saw Black Panther offices, blown up. And I just felt that the reason why America is strong today, or any nation is strong today, is because of their continuity. They remember their forefathers, their founding fathers, their heroes and their sheroes, that lived for them, was prepared to die for them. And the only honor that we can give to them is by carrying on the legacy, and it's through continuity. It's not by starting something over new again and acting like because we're on the scene it started, but it's about where did they leave off. It's like when you march out with a regiment, a military regiment, and before you go into battle, there's a flag bearer, and your captain or your commander usually asks, if this flag should fall to the ground, who's going to pick it up next? And it was a matter of who's going to pick up that flag. When we lose one leader, another leader has to step up. It's not just about a leader either. You know, it's about leaders. It's about all of us doing whatever we have in our capacity, recognizing whatever gift that it is that we have, and how do we join those gifts together to make a solid movement. And so I realized early as an artist that I first started out with lending my art talent to the street corner murals, painting the murals and the pictures of our heroes when Malcolm and King and all of them were taken out of the flower of their life. You know, many of us artists joined in and painting their portraits in our community, making for young people still saw, you know, Malcolm, still saw King, still saw Medgar Evers, still saw Black Panthers struck, you know, leaders. And so images were very important. And then I transferred that even on another level, you know, on a spiritual level. I even started painting, you know, the patriarchs of the Bible, you know, in blackface, at the original form that they belonged in, that we would have positive images around us. And that was the artistic part of me. But it was always that passion in me that our race and our forebearers, our forefathers and foremothers were worth investing in and worth living for. And so because I saw at an early age our martyrs, there was an old man that said to me when I began my journey, he said, son, you know, the martyrs have their time, but don't try to just say that you will die for this cause. What we need is people who will live for this cause. So live for this cause. We've had blood shed already, but make a difference by living for it. Make this your life. Make this your passion. Make this your breath. Make this the very substance of your being. So it wasn't easy to travel to Africa, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s. You know, Kwame Nkrumah was gone, Sekou Touré was gone, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie was gone, Patrice Lumumba was gone. A lot of the progressive African leaders who were the ones chosen to make Africa different, they were wiped out by a cynical system that didn't want to see Africa transform. They didn't want Africa to be able to enjoy the fruits of her independence labor. They still wanted to keep Africa dependent. A lot of our early leaders who sought to go back to Africa at that time came into that turmoil and had to return back to the US. But still we had a legacy here. Still we had footprints in the ground here. We have W.E.B. Du Bois' tomb is here. He was buried here. His wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois, you know, stayed here all the way up until Nkrumah's overthrow. We had Richard Wright, the author. We had Maya Angelou, who lived here for a number of years, all the way up until Nkrumah's overthrow. We had people like Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali. We had Adam Clayton Powell Jr. We had so many prominent African American figures, intellectuals, politicians, performers, academians, and plain workers who came here to build Ghana as a new African nation. That's why Ghana has a black star in her flag, because it was meant to be a part of the diaspora. So that's how I linked up with Ghana versus Ethiopia or Liberia, which were also common at that time. You know, so a lot of people used to look towards Ethiopia, they look towards Liberia, but because of the unrest in those places, although Ghana had some instability, it was more stable of the three who were used to receiving people from the diaspora. And having studied that history and knowing that history, I heard the call of the ancestors calling me back to Ghana so we can finish the dream, because it had been deferred, it had been derailed, it had been thrown off track. And when you get lost on a journey, the first thing you try to do is identify where did you make that wrong turn, or how did you get off track and get back to that point and continue the journey to where you want to go in your destiny.
Amen.
Wow. I mean, I know you've already said all the things that needs to be said about this, but I have to ask you very directly. How important do you think it is for us as Africans in America to visit different places in Africa, and especially Ghana, and to make sure that our children have an opportunity to get direct access, not just books, but, you know, we take vacations. See, I've been having that conversation with people since we've been back. Oh, we can't get there. It's too expensive. It's this, it's too far. But then they go to Hawaii, which, you know, obviously is in America, but still they take that long trip. They pay that money to go to Hawaii, and then they go, of course, to places out of the country. And I believe that there was a very deliberate an intentional attempt to make us stay away from visiting Africa by making people feel like it would be dangerous, it's dirty, it's, you're not, you know, all the things, the negative things. But how important
Absolutely.
do you think it is now for people to bring their children and families to the continent?
I think it is extremely important. It's probably one of the most important decisions that you can make in your life and make for your children or any of your family members. This is something that completes us in a way that we don't even know or can't anticipate. It's not a matter of coming to live to Africa or relocate to Africa, but it is a matter of reconnecting to Africa. We have to remember that within the traumatic experience of having been snatched and torn away from Mother Africa was not natural. Those of us who are in the Americas by virtue of the North Atlantic slave trade are here and by virtue of the most traumatic experience that any class of human beings have ever experienced over an extended amount of time, so consistently and so conspiratorially, from so many different nations that have been a part of that conspiracy and have benefited from it. So in our DNA, there's still some trauma. And we don't know within ourselves how remedial it is for us to come back to the continent and just walk on that soil, come back on that continent and have the voice of our ancestors embrace us, envelop us, to even live within the concepts of an African world. Something happened to us that we don't live in our conscious mind with. It registers in our subconscious mind. And as I said, in our DNA. And it's only when you touch base back on that soil that returns back to you. There's a level of empowerment that doesn't come academically. It doesn't come intellectually. It comes through your soul. And, you know, we used to use that term in the 60s and the 70s, soul brother, soul sister. Well, there's a part of our soul that remains in Africa. And then the other part of that, people have tried to make Africa so distant, you know, from us, tried to make us ashamed of Africa. And the only way we can get rid of that shame is to confront it, to come back here and feel the reality that this is where we come from. Whether we choose to come back here or not, we must never neglect to identify with it. I know that I come up in a generation in the US where right after World War II, people used to laugh at Japanese products. They used to call them just Japs. Watches didn't work, radios didn't work. People made fun of, I said, Japanese people, but Japan rebuilt herself, and in rebuilding herself, she never denied who it is that she was, and her people kept faith in her. And so therefore, when Japan became strong again, Japanese people are respected again all over the world. Same thing with Chinese people. People saw them as people that do your laundry, make well-starched shirts and sheets, or either, you know, good Chinese food. People laughed at them. But now that China, through its diaspora, has been made strong, because this diaspora has used its exposure to technology that they came in contact with in the West to share that technology back home. And now China actually is vying for the most powerful nation in the world. And so likewise, Africa will never realize her strength until African people make her strong. And African people will never realize their strength, nor be respected, nor have their dignity restored until Africa's dignity is restored. People think Africans are inferior because they think Africa is inferior. People disrespect Africans because they disrespect Africa. I don't care what we have in terms of our degrees. If we are a PhD and you stand next to any other nationality, they assume that you are inferior until you prove your equalness, your equality, or your superiority. But we must always prove ourselves. And that's because of the stigma on Mother Africa. So we have a duty to help to restore the dignity of Africa so that African people, no matter where we walk out on this globe, will have our dignity restored. And that can only happen when your mother is respected. And Africa is our mother. And we must protect our mother, protect our house, and that way we protect ourselves and shield ourselves. So I promote that strongly. Every African child deserves to visit Africa, wherever it is that you go, and walk on African soil, be amongst African people, see yourselves on billboards, see yourself at the center of activity, in the center of attraction, see yourself in an African world where we're empowered. No matter what our state is, no matter what our challenges are, we still have worlds that we have built and maintained in Mother Africa, and every African deserves to experience that.
Amen.
I'm going to buy my ticket right now.
Yeah, that's
right now.
Man, listen, that right there that's supposed to be a commercial, man. But like I said, you know, I was very emotional inside the slave dungeons. I couldn't hold back tears, you know.
Yes.
And you told us a lot about the history, you know, told us about a lot of people who you've given this tour to. And I remember you you told us about when you brought the Obamas and you did the tour with them, and you said, and you told us how they were pretty much cool until one point that you seen that President Obama was fighting back tears at one point, and I just want to know.
Well, actually, yes. You know what it was actually when I was doing, I shared with you that the tour operator, the young man, S.O. Blankston, that gave him the tour, was somebody that I worked with through the years, and we were giving him mentorship and tutelage the night before the Obamas came. So he made sure that he hit the proper points. And so when that experience is over, we were right there. So he shared every second and every moment of that experience. But yes, it was the point where it was reported that, of course, the presidents, the first lady and her mother and her daughters, they felt and showed some emotions throughout that tour. And it was that the president had pretty much composed himself. But it was when he came out of the male dungeon, and it was said to him that this was the church, the Anglican church that was upstairs or right up on top of the male dungeon, that he showed, the most emotions he had showed on that trip, and actually kind of buckled a little bit there. To think about the irony that people could worship above the male dungeon with human beings up to a minimum of 1,000 and many times up to 1,500 males being kept incarcerated in those dungeons with their moaning, their groaning, all the crying, the tears, and whatever else, that you could actually be holding church upstairs from there.
That really touched me, man. And so I'm just trying to figure out, how do you, I know it's been a lot, but it must be, do you relive those emotions? Do you find yourself getting emotional, or have you become somewhat numb to it as you continue to do the tour? Do you find yourself reliving those emotions with the people that you're giving the tour?
Yeah, I do find myself reliving it. I treat every tour sacred, and I take none of them for granted. I don't remove myself from the experience of what our ancestors went through. And that's what helps me convey to those who are on that pilgrimage or that tour at that time, feel it, because I feel it. There's not a single time that I can go there and go through that exercise and not conduit the spirit of our ancestors. And that's what I see it as. I see it as a ritual that I actually perform anytime that I'm going into that. Not a ritual per se, but it is a ritual. I meditate strongly. And I ask that the spirit of the Almighty and the spirit of our ancestors convey through me what that person needs to experience, or that group needs to experience for that time. There are mechanical things that are the same in terms of the historical content, the historical facts, the historical logistics. But the spirit component of it is I try to tune into every person, every client that I go through there with, so that their spirit, their experience is an enriched one, and not just part of some ritual that you can get off of a boilerplate. Like, right. Oh, I've seen that, I've done that before. So even when people repeat the tour, they tell me they felt something different. They heard something different. And they're glad they even repeated it. So it never gets redundant for me. So it never becomes redundant for the people that I'm serving at that time.
Well, I tell you what was emotional for me. I watched white folks, Europeans and others, walking around, taking pictures, smiling, laughing, having a good old time. And I struggled with that, Rabbi. I can't lie absolutely. To you. I struggled with it. And as we rode home or back to the hotel, it was hitting. And then when we got back to the hotel, because so many people are obviously doing big business in Ghana, and it also has become a vacation spot, there were white people in the lobby enjoying their martinis, and they were laughing and they were talking. And it really, really struck a nerve with me that I'm not sure that they felt, because coming back, we were quiet. We didn't even have words to describe what we just
see that's the way y'all concluded.
Yeah. Yes. And the other young man who was with us, our brother and the fourth co-founder of Until Freedom, attorney Angelo Pinto, he was with us. He just kind of blurted out in the car, "We are not outraged enough. We're not outraged enough." And I don't
Yes.
believe that that outrage should just be ours. I had to reconcile with myself. And I said after, when we did our show immediately following, this is not just African history, it's European history also.
Absolutely.
White folks
Absolutely.
need to study this. So I just wanted you to know it hit me hard to see white people like just normal.
Celebrating.
Sure.
Celebratory.
Sure. Well, let me share this. First of all, I don't do this tour for white people. I do it for all people. But they should have this experience. What I do deprogramming for them after they've gone through it. I've been in sessions where we've discussed it. So I can really penetrate into them to let them know the role they played in this. And where we find the relationships today, human relationships today, have been seriously damaged because of the whole white supremacist theory, which was manufactured out of that experience. Because as you know, and you remember, when I started the tour and I gave the story of Mansa Musa, the condition of West Africa, 700 years ago versus Europe, even coming down further to 500 years ago versus Europe, and what has happened in that gap. And so the theory of white supremacy having been manufactured out of that period, and we've been the victims of it, and other people are victims. They don't see it that way. They see themselves as just benefactors. But in that respect, yes, they need to hear this, but I don't do those joint tours through the dungeons because the dynamics are too much. And our people deserve to have that experience as their experience.
Sacred, yeah.
Yes, it's sacred. And so I just had about 1 month ago, I had 100 people from NAACP that we did together. 60 of them were university students. And because they were sponsored by some white people, of course, they wanted to go on the tour, but my condition was they can't go on the same tour that I'm doing. We have other tour guides there that will give a meaningful tour, and they should have that tour. But my tour is for our people, and that's who I cater to. If there's a debriefing session, they can be debriefed. But this experience is a sacred experience, and they understand because they know what they hold sacred to themselves that we can't participate in, whether we know it or not. And we have sacred things, and this is one of them that they cannot participate in with us, especially this type of tour. With another assignment that you went through there with, that's another thing. So the same thing with this group that I mentioned earlier, the 350 who are here right now. They didn't have many, but there's at least about 10 educators, white Americans who are with them. And we had to do the same thing, separate them from the experience. They had the experience and they should have it because we suffer more from white ignorance than we do from our own ignorance. And as Europeans' ignorance of us that breeds that prejudice and that inferiority complex on their superiority complex on their part is through their ignorance. They don't know us. We were renamed in history. Our names were taken away. Then they know the Negro. The Negro is their product that they manufactured. We have our African retention trade. They manufactured the Negro. That's not who we are. That's who they know. That's who they want us to be. They've never taken the time to know us. But we knew every aspect of them because we had to live under them. So we had to learn them. I use the expression, we would hand the slave master a handkerchief before he sneezed because we had to anticipate every movement he made. We had to know what he was going to do before he knew he was going to do it. So we had to learn of them. We had to know them. We had to anticipate them to even survive. They only knew the face that we showed them and what they thought they had made out of us. So in our best moments, we're schizophrenic. We show them the face that we think they want to see or we want to show them. They make it look like they were successful in who they remade us into. But there's us that they don't know. They've never known. So they need to be enlightened without us wasting too much time on that. Because one of the reasons why I'm in Africa, I said, I spent 40 years of my life in America. And my great-great-grandfather slaved for America, and he was never respected as a human being. My grandfather sharecropped for America. He was never respected as a human being and as a man. My father worked all of his life in dignity in America and retired, never respected as a man. I'm not willing to slave, sharecrop, nor give all of my life to America. So what would be my expectation of them accepting me? So I'm not looking for the acceptance of white America to accept me. I'm looking to invest my energy in repairing our people, whether it's in America or whether it's in Africa. My attention, my focus is on my people.
Well, can I just jump in real quick, my son, and say, Imagine they don't know us and we don't know us either.
Yes.
It's such a heavy load to carry when you do know.
Yes.
When you do know,
Yes.
like after you've been educated and you've touched the soil and you've had the experience, then you watch the world happening and you realize why our young brothers are killing one another, because they don't know.
Absolutely.
They've not been exposed to where we come from. And it, you know, for me as a leader, it is very, very heavy. I think it got heavier after coming back, you know, from the continent. So I just want to say that. And I guess we could transition.
You're right.
We should transition to our topic, because I think this is right on point.
All right.
We were talking before you came on about The Woman King, and I mentioned to you how incredible this film is. And one of the things that has become a topic of discussion online is people wanting to boycott, and this is led by Black folks, people wanting to boycott The Woman King because they say two different things. One is that the history of the Dahomey tribe is not being represented properly in two different ways. Some say that women are being romanticized in the film as though this group, they didn't want to kill and enslave Africans. And so they, you know, presented the king with the opportunity to sell palm oil. And that's not the truth. The truth is that the Dahomey women were just as ruthless as the men. And they weren't, you know, they weren't like these good moral people who, you know, wanted to see change. So that's one side of it. The other side is people saying that because they know or have read or have heard that the Dahomey tribe was engaged in the slave trade, that they don't feel we should be celebrating that particular, you know, group of people in a movie like this. But also, they wanted to, some of these same people and others wanted to boycott Harriet, the movie about Harriet Tubman. And it appears to me that every time we have especially dark-skinned Black women as the center character, where the story is about what Black women did and the role that they played in terms of fighting for us or whatever role, and powerful roles, that there's always a demand for boycott. And the question we asked here today, is it sabotage or is it genuine critique? We don't always know, right? And so just wanted to get your thoughts on sabotage or critique, and what do you think? Because and I'll say this and then let you respond. I don't believe that we should watch any film and take it as the full history. I think we have a responsibility to do research after, you know, we watch a film. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for, you know, allowing me to have a chance to weigh in on that. And let me first say that my perspective is not coming from having viewed the film, but I'm familiar with the dialogue and what happens, you know, when we try to promote ourselves in any positive light, and especially for our women, and especially for our women who don't come in the stereotypical features of what has been defined as beauty, you know, in America. And so when you raise those points, you know, it brings to me the age-old arguments of never giving our women, Black women, women of African ancestry with the features of Africans and the non-stereotypical form and non-acceptable form that America or the West has been used to presenting, that they don't get that without a struggle. We still struggle. Now, all of us know Hollywood in America. If you're not growing up in America, you know, or in the West, then maybe you can say you don't know the intentions, you know, and the motives of Hollywood. Hollywood, you know, is about making profit. You know, they separate films sometime as documentaries, but when we have a drama, full drama film, they have to put in every drama pieces in the film that don't necessarily meet the criteria of all the historical accounts by detail. So they have to put something in it that makes it worth being called a drama. That having been said, we can't tell the story of Africa, without it having multiple sides. Most times we say two sides, but the story of Africa is so complex, we can't even say that it has two sides. So if we decide now to bring about with some dignity, and that's where the problem comes in, to bring about with some dignity our narrative and our truth out of whatever segment of history that we choose to tell it from, is no different in our everyday life when we share experiences, everyday life and every day that we live, and we make an account for that day's activities. There's a positive way of sharing what we've lived, the experience of that life today, and there's a negative way. There's a diplomatic way we say with words we can say something, and there's an undignified way that we can say something. So I would say with critique, nothing wrong with critique. We should always be critiquing ourselves. We were people who always critique ourselves, but we shouldn't be apologizing for celebrating ourselves. We shouldn't be apologizing for glorifying ourselves, as long as it's not a total distortion. White folks have built up their self-esteem for years, but we don't call it self-esteem movies. We don't call it self-esteem Hollywood. All the stretching of the imagination and the stretching of the facts, they stretch the facts outside of facts to become outright lies, not even contradictions. And we enjoy it. We support those movies. We finance those movies. We help break box office records every weekend and every time any one of them have a debut. So anytime something that comes along that looks like it might empower people of African ancestry, Black folks, to make us feel good, to make us feel with a high sense of self-esteem. And I'm not talking about feel-good movies. I'm talking about movies that touch the content of our history that we walk away with feeling good. I don't even like the fact that they call the movies that came through in the 70s blaxploitation, exploitation movies, because we were so happy in that generation just to see Black men get together in the hood and outthink and outsmart white folks. We just was glad that at the end of the matter, we got over on the mafia. Now they label it, in a post, humorous way. Oh, these are Black exploitation movies. To us, we were winning finally. To us, we didn't end up dying first. When I was a youngster, every hero we had in the movies, they had to die. Even when Jim Brown was our greatest heroes on a football field, when he got his major movie, in The Dirty Dozen, and he was in that movie. And then at the last moment, Jim Brown had to die. And it was like, oh no, Jim Brown died. We always walked away with a bad feeling. So for us to tell stories and them to have some historical content, not just imaginatory historical content, but be put in some historical context, especially when it involves Africa today. And walk away with some good feeling, especially for our women, that they have not been sideliners. They have not just been behind men. In some cases, not just been beside men, but being in front of them. We shouldn't have to pay a price or a penalty for that, and be overcritical. Martin Luther King said at the height of the movement, when he was being criticized for his methodologies and so much, he said, let us not be bogged down with the paralysis of analysis. That we analyze things so deeply that we become paralyzed, and rather than empowered from the inspiration of feeling good about ourselves. And we don't have to make apologies for feeling good about ourselves, feeling good about our images, feeling good about reconstructing ourselves who have destructively been dismembered and disemboweled and disenfranchised from the dignity of just feeling good.
That's the point.
That is definitely the point, man. I think for me, watching the movie, right, there was so much back and forth before I watched the movie, and then watching the movie, I was empowered. There was this, that it was,
that's the key. You were empowered.
I was empowered. They try to say that it pitted men against women, and to me, it showed them working in unison. It showed them moving as one unit. It showed exactly what each of us represent, right? Like women represent this sense of power and strength, and they represent a conscience to men sometimes that we don't, our egos sometimes take over and we move off our ego and pride. And it showed how a woman's, her intellect and her emotion and her, you know, her level to reason with him softened that ego because he respected her so much and they respected each other. And they were able to rule together to where she was deemed the woman king because she earned that. And he had earned because he had his abilities and he was a strong and respected and he had levels of understanding. He understood, you know, culture. He understood the history and he was like his father in that regards, and people had respected him. And these were two respected people that respected each other and were able to lead because of this mutual respect. You know, and a lot of times you don't see that. You see levels of hierarchy.
And see, it's important that, again, we have that balance in Africa. There's no king that can sit on the stool in Africa without him being chosen by a woman. That's what our queen mothers do. The final say so after the kingmakers have chosen candidates and they've gone through screening. The final say so is that queen mother who puts her finger on the one that will be king, the man that would be king. We have history throughout Africa and various cultures about the role that our women played, even as queens being king. Hatshepsut, she was the queen, but she ruled as a king. The Candace queens of Ethiopia, you know the power that they had. Queen Makeda, Baucis Makeda, that we know as Queen of Sheba. We know the power that they had and how they ruled their kingdoms as kings, but they were queens. And so we had that balance.
Queen Ya Asentewa. I'll never, ever will forget that sister in the story.
Absolutely. That reigns supreme here in Ghana. That's a part of our living legacy. Every Ghanaian child knows Nana Queen Ya Asantewa and what she did when the men were depressed and depleted in their spirit because their king had been captured and imprisoned and put in the Elmina castle dungeon and locked up. And she went and fired up all the men. If y'all will not get your act together, then I'll lead us into battle and I'll recover our king and I will take on the British. And these stories live, and we have multiple stories like that. And we need to revive more of them. And we have living history that we don't need to use imagination to come up with superheroes. We are real superheroes. You know, I mean, look, contemporarily, we never have to make no Rocky because there was a Muhammad Ali. There was a Joe Louis. There was a Jack Johnson. We didn't need a Hollywood to make up a Rocky. You know, we go through all the episodes of our history. We have really what you call superheroes. And that's not talking about the leaders and the narrative that we're now digging up. I was telling people the other day, we can't use a shovel to dig up our history. We need an excavator. They buried our history so deep. And they buried it and put rocks on it, cement blocks on it. So we need excavators to break up the fallow ground. Then we got to go deep and deep and deep to go down where they buried up our history and smothered it up. It's their lies that have prevailed. So they can't exaggerate that enough. I mean, I know the history, you know, there, and I know that there was a lot of things that are not nice telling. But what is more of a feel-good culture than American history?
Right. Everything we learned.
Critical race theory is what?
Yeah.
Critical race theory is that they don't want their children to feel depressed.
Exactly. They don't even want you to know that history. They don't even want you to know that slavery existed. They don't want you to talk critical race theory. I mean, they went through a whole 6 months of finding ways to change the curriculum in colleges and forcing, you know, school districts not to talk about enslavement at all. But listen, you talked about digging up the history, and I know you got to go, and at some point we got to end this show, but it's just so good. But we knew that, so we left a lot of space for us to be able to talk with you and get really deep. But let's get to the other topic that is all over the news, and I see a lot of Black people who are either trying to figure out why were folks so upset about the coverage of the Queen passing, Queen Elizabeth III, right? And then there are some people are like, well, why y'all so upset about that? You know, because they don't know. They don't know. And then there were people who were super duper angry about it. And I'm not sure that they all understood the history either. Rather, you know, some people just have heard, oh, the Queen was a part of an empire that did some bad things to African people. But I listened to a lot of the critique, and I could tell that even the super duper angry people, not all of them, of course, really didn't understand the depth of the history, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and of course, I don't want to be disrespectful to those who do know, and they know very much so about what took place, and they've studied. But one thing that came up, and I want you to just break it down. We don't even have to talk. But there was one thing that came up where people kept talking about her crown and the diamonds in the crown. And they were saying now it's time for the diamonds to be returned to where they came from. And I realized that I don't even know the history of that. So why don't you talk to us about, and I don't think we can let the Portuguese off the hook, especially because in The Woman King, the Portuguese are mentioned. They're the ones that are actually there for trading of humans.
Yes.
So let's give it to us, Rabbi.
Yes. Well, yes, I'm glad that you did bring that up because it is the current debate at the moment. And I think that there's a reason why today, let's take currencies, that the strongest paper in the world right now that we call money is the British pound. And you say, why is that so? How can that paper be more valuable than all the other paper, more valuable than the dollar, more valuable than the euro? What makes that pound, so powerful in world exchange and currency? And the answer is entwined there, because the British, they presided over the largest imperialistic exploitation of the developing world than any other empire and longer. They perfected the slave trade and colonialism. Of course, you see the French, trying to, rivaling them in Africa, but nobody has presided over the most brutal, imperialistic, exploitative government in the world than what we know as Great Britain. And the Queen represented the head of that. She was the head of that. Not one single petition towards reparations, reconciliation was ever addressed in a formal manner. They were all ignored. We see that there was never, ever any granting of independence by the British Crown without serious atrocities being committed to maintain those colonies before those colonies won their emancipation and independence by struggle. Even though Ghana was not an armed struggle, it was still a struggle. And that struggle was only won because of an earlier agreement that was made with the Aboriginal People's Protection Right, where Ghana established way before this queen came to the throne that she was the Aboriginal people there, and the land ultimately belonged to the original people who were there. So even though the English colonized it, the land never belonged to them. But outside of that, when we start talking about the atrocities that took place in South Africa, where the stone that she wore in her crown came from, and in places that got to be known as Zimbabwe, who were earlier Rhodesia, the pronunciations of Ian Smith, who was originally an Englishman, the protection they got from the English, the demonization of Robert Mugabe, because England did not stand behind its promise to compensate its farmers for the land that they had stolen from the Zimbabweans and had promised, and the Zimbabwean Robert Mugabe got them to led a movement to take that land back, and the British promised to compensate them and pay them reparations. Can you imagine? But nonetheless, the British made that comment, and they didn't do it. Rather, what they did, rather than fulfill their promise and fulfill their word, which is all happening under the queen that just passed, they rather went on a campaign to demonize Robert Mugabe. And so, although Tony Blair and Bush engaged in pronouncing to the whole world that if Robert Mugabe didn't give in to the demands of the white farmers, that they would break his economy and they would turn his people against him. They had the nerve to even advertise what they would do to destabilize his country rather than to address the situation that was at hand. And they went along and demonized Mugabe. You had Black people, even Black leaders saying, Mugabe's too old. He's an old man. Why don't he step down from office? Mugabe's messed up the economy. Mugabe's destroyed the country. They never, ever talked about the actions of the British Crown. They never talk about the actions of the British politicians who forecast that and did that to protect their illegal migrants who migrated to Southern Africa years ago and illegally occupied that land, committed so many atrocities that we cannot come up with the numbers and the figures of the African lives who were brutalized, who were murdered, who were disenfranchised, who lost their mind and went insane, and that crosses the borders of Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, and is in all of Southern Africa, and not just Southern Africa. Look at the situation that we have that the British Crown was a part of. We have Ghana, we have Nigeria, we have Gambia, we have Egypt, we have Jamaica, Falkland Islands, we have India. All of these were under the crown of England. And all of these were tributaries to England, not tributaries and allowed to operate in their own dignity and their own economies and pay taxes, but literally were enslaved and literally were brutalized to enrich the British Crown. So it is only those people, like I said, who have not come to grips with the history of England and how they have maintained their crown and how they had maintained their position, even though they've lost a lot of ground today, that would speak by virtue of them having been programmed, or I would even use terms like brainwashed, to where they become insensitive to the insensitivity of how the British got to be who they are. How can someone who does not have one single gold mine have the largest reserve of gold in the world? How can someone who doesn't have one single diamond mine have so many diamonds, not just in the crown, but in storage that backs up the paper that is used for currency? So what we need to do is become more informed about what was the result of all of this exploitation. What is in the details of why people who are calling for reparations are calling for reparations? Let's put these things in perspective. How did this small little island all the way in the Northern Hemisphere become as rich as it has? How do so many of us speak the English language over our own language? Was it by choice that we didn't want to speak our language? What was the process that caused us to be English-speaking nations? And then we're only cutting on the edge. We're only on the cusp of the matter of what that digging would open up if we were to really dig and go into that history. So we even have the fact that most recently in the last 2 years, the same governments and crowns that called for Africans of the Caribbean and Africans and other melanated people to come from other parts of the world to help rebuild England after World War II, because they had lost so many men and women in the war, they needed help. And then all of a sudden, after they find themselves back up on their feet 2 to 3 years ago, they call these same population undocumented people and unwanted people in England and want to send them back to the lands of where they originated from, showing that the insensitivity has not matured. Underneath is the same white privilege that they have introduced to the world as white supremacy that the English became dominant and masters of and supreme of. So in that respect, by the time the English came along with the involved in the slave trade, they actually mastered it like nobody else before them had. Others who were abandoning it, the English were coming into it. And so, as I said, we can use the show exclusively to talk about that for hours and would not even do anything but touch the tip of the iceberg in terms of what would be listed as the number of atrocities that took place. Now, because the English have a system where they separate the politics, the prime minister, and the parliament from the crown, but believe me, we should not be deceived. Nothing happens except under the authority and with the approval and under the influence of the crown. That's what gives the cover. It's the crown that gives the cover. So it's a mastery of political science for us to be presented in a fashion that when it's convenient, the whoever wears the crown, king or queen, can take the credit. And when it's not convenient, they can distance themselves from it. But we should not be deceived by that mastery of political science by giving us that deception in their operations.
Listen, it's like a history class, man. This is 4 years of college in an hour, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That you've never learned, that you've never been taught. And that's why I say, just the experience of what you gave us transformed my life, for forever.
Even if we look at the American history, let's tie this in. If we look at American history, the founding fathers of America that were reconstructed into heroes, Let's look at how they were founded. If we look at the language of the Declaration of Independence, the white Americans who were invested in separating themselves from England, they wrote in there that the King of England, George, was a despot, that he was a tyrant. They had to justify their reasons for wanting to separate, because they said it's no small thing when a nation of people wants to separate themselves from a sovereign power. So they had to justify their reasons for wanting to separate from England. And the reasons that they justified started with the tyranny of the leadership and of the crown of England. That's in the document. So what was in the historical annals of time that showed that they ever changed their character, that we would not suspect them to be exactly who their own children said they were when they claimed their independence? And what they did was they learned that if my mother and my father are thieves and we're doing all this hard work in a foreign land and they're treating us like strangers and they're treating us like stepchildren, then why are we robbing somebody else's land to pay them taxes? If we're going to be thieves, let us steal for ourselves. So they stole the American territory and refused to give the spoil to their parents, and rather established their own white nation and kept those spoils for themselves. That's the foundation of America.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Wow.
sir. You broke it down. No, before we go, I just want to touch on this, because there's this whole thing, and and we never ignore it. We always acknowledge that there was Africans trading other Africans. There were Africans who were involved in the slave trade that contributed to the slave trade. But I want you to touch on and give the history of that and break it down and explain it in
Absolutely. More. The reason why we have Iraqis in America is because Iraqis were collaborating against Iraq in the Iraqi War. The reason why you have Afghanistanians being, brought into America right now and commercials on TV about how we should open our arms to them because they were friends to us in Afghanistan is because they were fighting and trading against their own people. They were Jewish people who collaborated in the Holocaust. Nobody mentions that. No other exploited people, suffering people have ever had to take the double blame of being the cause and the reason for their own exploitation. They were collaborators, but the collaborators were so small in number that they wouldn't even constitute double-digit percentage points. Most Africans were victimized or in the dark of what those few collaborators were doing to help collaborate with the Arabs or the Europeans and selling other Africans. It wasn't a matter of whole African populations collaborating to sell their brothers and sisters. As I said, they were collaborators, just like we still got collaborators in the Black community today, that sell out the Black people today. But that doesn't say all Black people are sellouts. That's never changed in history. What we must do and be successful in doing is dissecting these stories and these narratives and putting them in proper perspective. So they're not sold to us as a wholesale sale, that is the narrative. They sold that to us for centuries. Well, your own people sold you into captivity. Well, your own people are responsible for you in slavery. But if I give you contemporary and historical context, America, every time they had a campaign with a different Native American ethnic group, they had other Native Americans from another ethnic group that worked as their spies, that worked as their interpreters. But nonetheless, no Native American would accept the narrative to say that their own people sold America to the white man or gave America over to the white man. So African people needed to reject that narrative. Not that we reject the truth that is in it and the percentages that were involved, but put it in proper perspective and not allow that to be the dominant narrative whereby we tell that story. Who were the benefactors of that then? And who are the benefactors of that today? Who were the victims of that then? And who are the victims of that today? And then we will come up with the proper account for who's responsible.
Well, that's
the mic drop. Drop the mic.
That's it, and I think one of the concerns is that the dialogue around Africans' participation in the slave trade will somehow diminish the call for reparations. And so it's important that we talk about what you said, who benefited from it then and who continues to benefit from it now. And also to understand for us, even for our people to understand that there was a small group of individuals engaged in that activity. But once the Europeans came, and you have to talk about this and then we're gone, I promise, because I know the production team thinks we're out of our minds. But you have to talk about the difference in what happened and how traded humans were treated under the African slave trade or the African trade of individuals versus when Europeans got involved. Because you told us at the dungeons, it was very distinctly different.
Very distinctly different. First of all, as people like to throw in our face that slavery is old as humanity or human society itself. And so there's the play on semantics. You know, if we want to use semantics, we can say any employee is a slave because he's working under a master. It's just terminologies. But what was different in the North Atlantic slave trade and what happened when Europeans enslaved our ancestors is we use the term chattel slavery. Our humanity was taken away from us. In the African system of indentured servants and slaves, quote unquote, a person always had the opportunity and the privilege, first of all, to be treated as a human being. Second of all, to be able to grow out of the status of being an employee, a slave, or a servant. That based on your character, your intellect, and based on your own prowess, you can raise yourself out of that situation, even to the point of becoming a member of the family. We have African tradition that is forbidden to even speak about a member of your family whose pedigree is not blood, but may have come from a parent or a grandparent that used to be a servant or started out in their relationship with the family as a servant. But because of their servitude and their dedication, they actually grafted into the family and become a family member in all equal parts. So that is a different kind of system of servantry or slavery, quote unquote. Then you see in chattel slavery, when your name is taken away, your language is taken away, the ability to practice your customs and your culture is taken away, your humanity is taken away. You are a perpetual slave. You can't be free. Your children can't be free. The law doesn't recognize any rights as human rights. There was no place that any enslaved African that can take a white man to get justice. When I left America, I left there and there had not been one single case where a white man had been convicted of raping a black woman, legally convicted, because the foundation didn't allow for us to bring any white person to court and win, because we had no rights as a human person to say that we were violated. Because how can a human being somebody's not a human being be violated for human rights? Now we find ourselves in an era when we're coming into advocating for human rights, where we even have animals that have more rights than Africans, and we've been struggling for 400 years to have human rights, and you get a larger penalty for having dog fights and punishing dogs and not looking for missing cats than you do for looking for missing people of African ancestry. So the institution introduced by the West of chattel slavery was quite different, 180 degrees different from what we practice on the African continent and what a human being's chances were in life and in life cycle to redeeming himself out of that without the need for legislative law, but the human compassion that exists within our systems, our families, our villages, and our communities allowed for human character to stand out and you to be able to be rewarded for your human character and the excellence of character and duty and service versus being perpetually punished because there's no way you can be free in a society. Can you imagine that even the idea that we were not allowed to refine our intelligence by being formally educated and being denied the right to reading and writing was a direct law to stop us from refining the best of our human senses and intelligence? So these are crimes.
These are crimes.
And then we would have ourselves debating contemporary descendants of white people who say that affirmative action is illegal, but have no memory. They don't have any voice when it comes to how they've been given the advantages they've been given. Can you imagine an affirmative action being deemed as reverse racism because 10% of a population is being reserved for people who have been denied for 400 years, and them not saying nothing about the fact that is, when you turn it around, that 90% has been preserved for them.
90%. Rabbi, we've got to go. We gotta go.
We can do a whole
part two. Part 2.
Yes.
We gotta do
Yes.
part 2. We're gonna watch this and think about and listen to the chatter online and figure out what are some other things we want to bring you back on to talk about. You are a gem that is, as far as I'm concerned, not enough people know about you, but they will now, because we're going to tell everybody anywhere, up and down the coast, in and out, that, that folks have to know you and what you have been able to accomplish, what you're doing every single day, and how important you are to our culture. We thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me and giving this opportunity. And may you continue to be blessed in the work that you're doing. And may the ancestors continue to shield you and empower you and guide you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Please.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.
Every time that I'm in the presence of the Rabbi, I'm in awe. His understanding of history and our culture is just unmatched, and it's always just listen. I just sit here and just listen to him. It's like, I never used to like school. School wasn't really my thing, but I could see me going to his class and just being intrigued and wanting to learn. That's what teaching looks like to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he's great. He's great. I hope people will listen to the interview. I don't even have much more to say because, and I know oftentimes if it's not, first of all, there's technical issues because he's in Africa. So it's slow. So there will be moments, I'm sure, in the midst of this show where people will not necessarily be able to see him, or they'll have to be, there'll be some distortion. And I hope folks do know, because the audio was clear as can be. And I hope people will not stop watching it because we're so driven by visuals. And, I hope people will listen, will download it for no other reason, our podcast, just to watch Rabbi Kohain, because what he just offered to us, you can't buy. Because
that's why I don't get it, man. I don't get how anybody hasn't tuned into this, man. Have you?
They don't know. They've never been.
Well, listen, you got to get to it. You got to get to Ghana. You got to look this man up. He is, like you said, he is a gem, and we are wasting our time. I don't get how you ain't been to Ghana. I don't get how you haven't said that.
Some people can't afford it.
Well, listen, man, hitchhike. You got a buddy pat. Listen, all that stuff.
No, it doesn't work like that.
Listen, people
have to plan.
They got $70 million sneakers. They buying the new Yeezys every time they come out. They got the new bag that come out. Get to them slave dungeons, man. Get to Ghana, understand your history, sit down with this man. He is a gem, and I'm just honored to have been able to sit and be in his presence and actually in Ghana. What he did here is amazing. But when you're in those dungeons and the way that he walks you through each step and explains to you what it is that our people were going through, and he describes it. It's like one of the best movie narrators you'll ever see. So make sure that you do that, man.
He's great. And
with that said, man, this is probably one of my favorite episodes, and this should make us #1 again. Podcast in the world, Street Politicians. If you have any questions, you have any ideas, something you want to hear about, let us know. We're here for you. Follow us at Street Politicians. I'm not going to always be right. Tamika D. Mallory's not going to always be wrong. But the rabbi's going to always be right. Pay attention to him. He's going to always be right. And we will both always, and I mean always, be authentic. Peace.
Peace.
Listen to Street Politicians on the Black Effect Network on iHeartRadio.
And catch us every single Wednesday for the video version of Street Politicians on iWomen.tv.